The medical conference chamber was designed to intimidate, with tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling painted with star charts of the Veltharian home system. Sarah stood at the central podium, surrounded by 30 of the most accomplished medical minds in known space, all of them towering over her, with their 8-foot frames and compound eyes that reflected the chamber's harsh lighting. Dr. Vorthen sat in the front row, his massive form radiating skepticism. Administrator Korthovel occupied the ceremonial position of honor, clearly present to ensure that diplomatic protocol was maintained regardless of how this unprecedented situation resolved itself. "Honored colleagues," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic system. "I come before you not to challenge Veltharian medical expertise, but to offer a different perspective on a problem that has puzzled your finest physicians." A low chittering arose from several audience members, the Veltharian equivalent of skeptical murmuring. Dr. Vorthen's mandibles clicked sharply for silence. "Dr. Chun," he said formally, "you have requested this extraordinary assembly to present a theory about Veltharian biology. While we appreciate your diseasm, we must remind you that you are here as a guest researcher, not as a medical consultant." Sarah activated her data displays, filling the chamber's holographic projectors with the scan results she had gathered. 3 days ago, researcher Sithara experienced what your protocols classify as a stress-induced episode. However, detailed mineral analysis reveals a different cause. The displayed scans showed cellular structures in startling detail, highlighting areas where essential minerals were critically depleted. Sarah had spent hours preparing visual comparisons that would be clear even to minds accustomed to very different biological paradigms. As you can see, the affected tissues show severe deficiencies in vanadium, molybdenum, and chromium compounds. These deficiencies create a cascade of cellular dysfunction that manifests as the symptoms you've been treating as psychological stress. Dr. Sithtal, the station's chief biochemist, leaned forward in her seat. "Dr. Chun, our standard nutrition protocols ensure adequate mineral intake for all residents. These deficiencies you describe would be impossible under current conditions." That's exactly the problem," Sarah replied, bringing up a new set of displays. "Your nutrition protocols are based on baseline requirements, but they don't account for cyclical variations tied to lunar phases. Veltharian females require significantly higher mineral intake during specific periods of your traditional monthly cycle." The chamber fell silent. Sarah could see confusion and growing concern on the faces around. Dr. Vorthen's exoskeleton had shifted to a darker hue that she hoped indicated serious consideration rather than anger. "The artificial environment of this station maintains optimal atmospheric and gravitational conditions," Sarah continued, "but it doesn't replicate the complex tidal forces and electromagnetic variations that would naturally occur on Velthara. Prime female Veltharians have evolved to synchronize their metabolic processes with these environmental cues. Without them, their bodies can't properly regulate mineral absorption." Dr. Kethver, a specialist in environmental medicine, stood up in the gallery. "Are you suggesting that our most advanced orbital facility is inadequate for our own species?" "I'm suggesting that it's too perfect," Sarah said carefully. "When you create an ideal environment, you sometimes eliminate natural stresses that biological systems depend on. It's like trying to grow earth plants under constant light and temperature. They'll survive, but they won't thrive. And eventually they'll develop problems that don't exist in their natural environment." She brought up her final set of data, comparative scans from the station's medical database, carefully anonymized but showing clear patterns of mineral depletion among female residents. "I've analyzed 3 months of routine medical scans. The pattern is consistent across all female Veltharians on the station, but the symptoms only become acute in individuals who have been here for extended periods. The females suffering from biological incompatibility syndrome," Dr. Vorthen said slowly, "have all been long-term station residents." "Yes, and their symptoms begin approximately 4 to 6 months after arrival. which matches the timeline for severe mineral depletion to develop. Administrator Korthovel spoke for the first time. Dr. Chun, if your analysis is correct, this represents a critical flaw in our most advanced facilities. What do you propose as a solution? Sarah felt her heart race as she realized they were actually taking her seriously. Immediate mineral supplementation for affected individuals, and environmental modifications to simulate natural tidal and electromagnetic variations. The supplements should provide relief within days. The environmental changes will prevent new cases from developing, and you believe this treatment will be effective? Dr. Vorthan asked. I'm certain of it. But I'd like to request permission to begin treatment with researcher Sithara as a test case. With her consent, of course. The chamber erupted in chittering conversation as the assembled physicians debated among themselves in rapid Veltharian that Sarah's translator couldn't keep up with. Finally, Administrator Korthovel called for order. Dr. Chun, your proposal represents a significant departure from established protocols. However, given the implications of your analysis, we cannot afford to ignore it. You have permission to proceed with treatment under close medical supervision. The next 48 hours became a whirlwind of activity. Sarah worked closely with Dr. Vorthan to develop a mineral supplement regimen that would be safe for Veltharian physiology. The station's engineers began modifying the environmental systems to introduce subtle variations that would simulate natural planetary conditions. Most importantly, Sarah watched as Sithara's condition improved with remarkable speed. The tremors that had racked her roommate's body for months disappeared within hours of the first supplement dose. Her exoskeleton regained its full iridescent sheen and her energy levels returned to normal. I cannot remember the last time I felt so ... Stable, Sithara said on the second morning, her voice carrying a joy that the translator couldn't quite capture. It is as though my body was struggling against itself, and suddenly the struggle has ended. Word of the successful treatment spread quickly through the station. Within a week, every female Veltharian resident was receiving the new supplement regimen, and the environmental modifications were being implemented throughout the facility. The results were dramatic and immediate. The epidemic of biological incompatibility syndrome virtually disappeared. Overnight, Dr. Vorthan came to their quarters personally to deliver the news that would change both their lives, Dr. Chun, he said, his massive form somehow conveying a humility that Sarah had never seen in a Veltharian before. The Medical Council has voted unanimously to recommend your treatment protocol for implementation across all Veltharian facilities. Your analysis has potentially saved thousands of lives. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. I couldn't have done it without Sithara's willingness to trust me, and your openness to considering an outside perspective. Indeed, Dr. Vorthan agreed. We have learned something important about the value of alternative viewpoints. The Council has also voted to extend your research exchange indefinitely, with full access to our medical facilities and databases. That evening, as Sarah and Sithara prepared for sleep in their shared quarters, the tradition that had seemed so awkward just weeks before felt completely natural. The platform adjusted to accommodate both their bodies, and Sarah found herself grateful for the custom that had brought them together. Sarah, Sithara said quietly, using her human name for the first time, my people believe that everything happens according to ancient patterns. Perhaps this tradition of sharing quarters exists precisely so that when we needed outside perspective, it would be there. Sarah smiled in the darkness. Maybe, or maybe sometimes the most important discoveries happen when different perspectives literally share the same space. The Medical Council is recommending that other stations implement similar exchange programs, Sithara continued. They believe that human medical knowledge could provide valuable insights into problems we haven't recognized, and Veltharian scientific methods could help humans understand biological systems we've never encountered, Sarah replied. This could be the beginning of something much bigger than either of our species imagined. Outside their quarters, The Great Research Station continued its orbit around Velthera Prime, but now its environmental systems pulsed with subtle rhythms that honored the biological heritage of its inhabitants. In medical facilities across the Veltharian Empire, physicians were learning to ask new questions and consider possibilities they had never imagined. The tradition that had forced a human and an alien to share sleeping space had become the foundation for a revolution in interspecies medicine. It had proven that human intuition, human willingness to question authority, and human determination to care for others had value even among the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, listening to Sithara's steady breathing beside her, she realized that this was exactly what humanity had to offer the stars, not advanced technology or superior weapon. The Veltharian Medical Facility occupied 3 entire levels of the research station, its corridors lined with diagnostic equipment that hummed with energies Sarah couldn't identify. Dr. Vorthan, the chief medical officer, towered over her even more than most Veltharians, his massive frame making the spacious medical bay feel cramped. Dr. Chun, his mandibles clicked with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as polite dismissal. I appreciate your concern for researcher Sithara, but our medical protocols are quite comprehensive. Her readings indicate minor stress responses, nothing more. Sarah held up the data tablet she had prepared, displaying the careful notes she had taken during the previous night's episode. With respect, Dr. Vorthan, the pattern of symptoms suggests something more systematic. The timing, the specific muscle groups involved, the respiratory changes. You observed a single episode, the Veltharian physician interrupted. We have 3 months of continuous monitoring data. May I see that data? Dr. Vorthan's compound eyes focused on her with something approaching incredulity. You wish to review Veltharian medical records? Dr. Chen, while we appreciate your species' enthusiasm for learning, our biology is far more complex than anything your people have encountered. Sarah felt her jaw tighten but kept her voice level. Human medicine has dealt with complex biological systems for centuries. Sometimes an outside perspective can identify patterns that familiarity might obscure. An interesting theory, Dr. Vorthan said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. However, our diagnostic protocols have been refined over millennia. If there were something to find, we would have found it. The dismissal was polite but absolute. Sarah left the medical facility with growing frustration and a growing conviction that Sithara's condition was being overlooked due to institutional blindness, rather than medical competence. Back in their shared quarters, she found Sithara at her research station, working with the careful precision of someone trying very hard to appear normal. The alien researcher's exoskeleton had returned to its usual iridescent purple-silver, but Sarah could see subtle signs of fatigue in her posture. How are you feeling? Sarah asked gently. Functional, Sithara replied, though her secondary arms trembled slightly as she manipulated the holographic data displays. Dr. Vorthan said you spoke with him about my condition. I did. He seems convinced it's just stress. Sithara's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was the equivalent of a bitter laugh. Yes, the stress of being the first female Veltharian to achieve 3rd academic circle ranking. The stress of working with alien species. The stress of sharing quarters with a being whose biochemistry is completely foreign. Sarah sat down at her own workstation, but instead of accessing her research files, she pulled up everything the station's database contained about Veltharian biology. Sithara, can you tell me about your reproductive cycle? The alien researcher's workstations went quiet, and Sarah could see all 4 of her arms freeze in motion. That is a very personal question among my people. I'm sorry if I'm being intrusive, Sarah said carefully. It's just that the timing of your episodes, the way they follow the lunar cycles. In human biology, cyclical pain often relates to reproductive processes. Veltharian females do not experience reproductive distress, Sithara said firmly. Our breeding cycles are voluntary and controlled. We do not suffer the biological chaos that plagues mammalian species. Sarah pulled up a detailed anatomical chart of Valtharian internal structure, frowning at the gaps in the available information. These diagrams are remarkably lacking in detail about female reproductive anatomy. Such information is considered private medical data. But how can doctors properly diagnose problems if they don't have complete anatomical references? Sithara was quiet for a long moment. Female Valtharians rarely experience reproductive medical issues. Our biology is more efficient than most species. Sarah felt a familiar chill. In her experience, when a medical system claimed that certain problems simply didn't exist, it usually meant they had stopped looking for them. Sithara, when was the last time a Valtharian female died of unexplained medical causes? That is not information typically discussed, because it doesn't happen or because no one talks about it. Another long silence. Then, very quietly, there have been some cases. Females who suffered from what the medical texts call biological incompatibility syndrome. They experience episodes of distress, weakness, eventual organ failure. It is considered a rare genetic disorder. Sarah felt her blood run cold. How many cases? In the past solar cycle? Perhaps 30 documented cases. Out of how many total females? Approximately 800,000. Sarah did the math quickly. A mortality rate that high from a supposedly rare genetic disorder would be considered an epidemic in human medicine. Sithara, I think your medical system has been misdiagnosing a treatable condition as a genetic disorder. That is impossible, Sithara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Our medicine is the most advanced in the known galaxy. Advanced doesn't mean infallible, Sarah said gently. Human medicine was convinced for centuries that certain conditions were psychological rather than biological. Sometimes institutional knowledge becomes institutional blindness. Over the next several days, Sarah threw herself into research with a determination that surprised even her. She cross-referenced Sithara's symptoms with similar patterns in human and other mammalian species, looking for biological processes that might manifest differently in Valtharian physiology. The breakthrough came when she was reviewing data about Valtharian atmospheric preferences. The species had evolved on a world with 3 moons, and their biological rhythms were still synchronized to complex tidal patterns that the artificial environment of the station didn't replicate. More importantly, Sarah noticed that Valtharian females required higher concentrations of certain trace minerals during specific lunar phases, the station's environmental systems, designed for optimal working conditions rather than biological accuracy, didn't account for these cyclical needs. Female Valtharians were slowly developing nutritional deficiencies that their own medicine didn't recognize, because the symptoms didn't match any known Valtharian conditions, but the symptoms did match a condition Sarah was familiar with from her work with extremophile bacteria, mineral deficiency leading to cellular stress and eventual organ failure. I need to run some tests. Sarah told Sithara that evening as they prepared for sleep, non-invasive scans that might show things your standard medical equipment doesn't look for. Dr. Vorthan would never approve such tests, based on the theories of a human researcher. Then, we won't ask Dr. Vorthan, Sarah said quietly. I have portable diagnostic equipment designed for extremophile research. It's sensitive enough to detect mineral concentrations at the cellular level. Sithara's compound eyes fixed on her with an expression Sarah couldn't read. You would risk your research position to help me? Sithara, if I'm right about this, it's not just about helping you. There are hundreds of Valtharian females who are going to die from something completely preventable if we don't figure this out. That night, as Sithara slept fitfully beside her, Sarah carefully ran her portable scanners over her roommate's exoskeleton. The readings confirmed her worst fears: severe deficiencies in 3 essential trace minerals, cellular damage consistent with long-term nutritional stress, and biochemical markers that indicated progressive organ dysfunction. Sithara was dying. slowly and painfully from something that could be treated with simple mineral supplementation the next morning. Sarah presented her findings to Sithara with a mixture of triumph and dread. The good news is that this is completely treatable. The bad news is that your medical system has been letting females die from mineral deficiency because they've never thought to test for it. Sithara stared at the scan results for a long time. These readings suggest that my cellular structure is fundamentally compromised. Yes, but it's reversible. With the right mineral supplements and environmental adjustments, your symptoms should disappear within weeks. And the other females suffering from biological incompatibility syndrome? They're all probably dying from the same thing. Sithara's exoskeleton shifted through several color phases as she processed this information. Dr. Chun, if you are correct, this means that our most advanced medical science has been inadequate. Not inadequate, Sarah said gently, and just focused on the wrong variables. Human medicine made similar mistakes for centuries. The important thing is that we can fix this. But fixing it would require convincing the Valtharian medical establishment to accept that a human researcher, on the station for less than a week, had identified a critical flaw in their diagnostic protocols. It would require them to acknowledge that their understanding of their own biology was incomplete. It would require them to admit that sometimes being the most advanced civilization in the galaxy wasn't enough. As Sarah prepared her formal presentation for the medical staff, she could feel the weight of history settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about treating Sithara's condition anymore. This was about proving that human science, human medicine, human determination to question established knowledge had value even among the stars, the tradition that had brought them together. The diplomatic quarters aboard the Valtharian station were designed for beings twice the height of humans, with ceilings that disappeared into shadows and furniture that made Dr. Sarah Chun feel like a child playing in an adult's home. The walls pulsed with a gentle bioluminescent rhythm that matched the artificial day-night cycle, casting everything in an ethereal blue-green glow. As Sarah adjusted her translator earpiece as Administrator Korthovel approached, his forearms moving in what she had learned was a gesture of formal welcome among his people. The Valtharian stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming like polished obsidian in the ambient light. Multiple compound eyes tracked her movement with unnerving precision. Dr. Chun, his translated voice carried the mechanical precision that made all alien speech sound formal. We have prepared your quarters according to our customs. As discussed in the cultural briefing, you will share accommodations with researcher Sithara of the 3rd Academic Circle. Sarah nodded, though she still felt uncomfortable about the arrangement. The Valtharians had insisted that their ancient traditions required paired housing for all residents of the research station. No exceptions, not even for the first human scientist granted access to their most advanced xenobiology facility. The 3-month research exchange had taken 2 years to negotiate, and she wasn't about to jeopardize it over sleeping arrangements. I understand, she said, keeping her voice diplomatically neutral. I appreciate the Valtharian Council's willingness to accommodate my research request. Administrator Korthovel's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. Researcher Sithara has been informed of your unique dietary and atmospheric requirements. Your quarters have been modified accordingly. The door to her assigned room dilated open with a soft whisper, revealing a space that was clearly designed for beings much larger than herself. The primary chamber stretched 20 feet across, dominated by what could only be described as a massive sleeping platform. The bed, if it could be called that, was more like a raised dais covered in what looked like memory foam that shifted and rippled with its own internal movement. Sarah's first glimpse of her roommate came as a shock, despite her preparation. Sithara was smaller than the other Valtharian Sarah had encountered, perhaps only 6.5 feet tall, but her exoskeleton held an iridescent quality that seemed to shift between deep purple and silver as she moved. Unlike the males of her species, her secondary arms were more delicate. designed for precise manipulation rather than the heavy lifting that characterized Veltharian males. Dr. Chun, Sithara's voice carried a musical quality that the translator couldn't quite capture, leaving an almost melodic undertone beneath the mechanical precision. I am honored to share quarters with Earth's representative. Sarah set down her single bag and tried to keep the conversation professional. Thank you for accommodating me. I know this arrangement is unusual. All traditions begin as unusual arrangements, Sithara replied, her compound eyes fixing on Sarah with what seemed like curiosity. Your species is smaller than our records indicated. We come in various sizes, Sarah said with a slight smile. I'm about average for human females. The next few hours passed in careful politeness as they established the basic rules of cohabitation. Sarah learned that Sithara worked in theoretical xenobiology, specifically studying the adaptation mechanisms of species that evolved on worlds with variable atmospheric compositions. It was work that complemented Sarah's own research into extremophile bacteria, which had earned her the coveted position on the exchange program DOT as the artificial evening approached. Marked by the walls shifting to a deeper blue rhythm, Sarah realized she had been dreading this moment all day. The sleeping arrangements were non-negotiable, according to Veltharian custom, something about shared thermal regulation that was supposedly essential to their social bonding. The cultural briefings had been vague on the details, but emphatic about the importance. The sleeping platform was certainly large enough for both of them. Probably large enough for 4 humans, but Sarah had never shared a bed with anyone, let alone an alien being whose biology she barely understood. She changed into her sleep clothes in the small alcove that served as her private space. Grateful for the few minutes of solitude, when she emerged, Sithara was already positioned on one side of the platform, her exoskeleton having shifted to a darker hue that Sarah assumed was some sort of resting state. The alien researcher had arranged herself in what looked like a meditation pose, her forearms folded across her torso. The platform will adjust to accommodate both our thermal requirements, Sithara explained as Sarah approached hesitantly. It is designed to maintain optimal sleeping conditions for multiple species. Sarah climbed onto the platform, surprised by how the surface immediately began to conform to her body shape and temperature. It was remarkably comfortable, though the sensation of the surface actively adjusting to her presence was disconcerting. She settled onto her side, maintaining a respectful distance from her roommate. Is this normal for your people? Sarah asked quietly. Sharing sleeping space with colleagues? For research partnerships, yes. Sithara's voice had taken on a softer quality. Thermal sharing promotes emotional bonding and increases collaborative efficiency. Your species may not experience the same benefits, but the tradition is important to us. They lay in comfortable silence as the room's lighting gradually dimmed to nearly complete darkness. Sarah found herself listening to the subtle sounds of her roommate's breathing, a complex rhythm that involved air moving through multiple respiratory chambers. It was oddly soothing, like listening to a complex piece of music played on an unfamiliar instrument. Sleep came surprisingly easily. Aided by her exhaustion from the long journey and the platform's remarkable ability to provide perfect comfort, Sarah drifted off thinking that this arrangement might not be as difficult as she had feared. She woke sometime in the deep cycle, the Veltharian equivalent of midnight, to the sound of distressed chittering. Sarah's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she could see Sithara's silhouette trembling violently on the other side of the platform. The alien researcher was curled into a tight ball, her forearms wrapped around her torso, and soft sounds of pain escaped her mandibles. Sithara? Sarah whispered, not sure if she should intervene. Are you all right? The trembling intensified, and Sarah could hear what sounded like labored breathing from multiple respiratory systems. Her medical training kicked in despite the alien biology involved. Whatever was happening, Sithara was clearly in distress. Should I call for medical assistance? Sarah asked, sitting up on the platform. No, Sithara managed between tremors. It will DOS always DOSes. But it clearly wasn't passing. If anything, the trembling was getting worse, and Sarah could see that Sithara's exoskeleton was taking on a sickly gray color, even in the dim light. Her experience with extremophile research had taught her to recognize biological distress signals, even in unfamiliar species. Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives. She moved closer to her roommate, close enough to feel the tremors radiating through the platform. "May I?" she asked gently, extending her hand towards Sithara's shoulder. The alien researcher looked up with eyes that reflected pain and confusion. "Humans. Touch for comfort?" "Sometimes," Sarah said softly. "If you'll let me—" Sithara's mandibles clicked weakly in what Sarah hoped was agreement. She placed her hand gently on her roommate's shoulder, surprised by the warmth that radiated through the exoskeleton. The trembling didn't stop, but something changed in Sithara's posture, a subtle relaxation that suggested the contact was welcome. "How long have these episodes been happening?" Sarah asked, her scientific mind already working on the problem. "Since the lunar cycles changed," Sithara whispered. "The medical staff says it is normal stress response to research pressure." Sarah frowned. In her experience, medical professionals who dismissed unexplained symptoms as stress were usually missing something important. The fact that the episodes coincided with lunar cycles suggested a biological trigger rather than psychological stress. As she maintained gentle contact with her roommate, Sarah began to notice patterns in the trembling. It wasn't random muscle spasms, but seemed to follow a specific rhythm, almost like contractions. Her mind began to form hypotheses about what might be causing such regular physiological distress. "Sithara," she said carefully, "has anyone performed a detailed scan of your internal systems recently?" "Standard health maintenance only," came the weak reply. "Dr. Vorthen says my readings are within normal parameters." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room temperature. In her experience, symptoms that fell within normal parameters but caused obvious distress were often the most serious, because they indicated something the testing protocol wasn't designed to detect. The trembling continued for another hour, during which Sarah maintained her gentle contact and observed everything she could about the pattern and intensity of Sithara's distress. By the time her roommate finally fell into an exhausted sleep, Sarah had developed several theories about what might be causing the episodes. None of them were reassuring. As the artificial dawn began to lighten the walls, Sarah remained awake, watch.